Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Holder. I'm a co-owner and founder of Wild Oak Medicine in Santa Rosa, California. I'm a naturopathic doctor, which is similar to a medical doctor, except for our philosophy is a little bit different. We try to find the cause of why somebody gets sick. I have specific training in oncology and neurology with a specialty in toxicology. So I study chemicals that cause cancer and neurological diseases. Recently, some of our work has been around firefighters. I live in Northern California, where we've had many, many large fires in the last 4 years. We have some ongoing studies where we're studying what got into the firefighters as well as how to get it out of them, in addition to my usual work with cancer patients.
Oh, this is so cool. I already have like five new questions I want to ask you. Before we get into it, I just
Yeah.
noticed there's a lens flare on the screen and it's just kind of on top of your eye, makes you look a little bit like the Terminator. So I think that this is really interesting. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not an expert, but I've worked in medical devices for 6, 7 years. And one of the things that a lot of people who work in the business side of medicine find, I would say, frustrating, but also we kind of understand that this is how the business work is. The money is to be made in the treatment, not in the prevention. Part of why we like to do these interviews with experts is also to just show that this is not conspiracy theory or like scaring people or trying to sell snake oil,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to understand more of the things that we put on our body, in our body, that are around us, and to, as consumers, make better choices, but also like as manufacturers, that we can create things that people want that are healthier. So I'm really excited for the conversation.
Yeah, we've had a lot of both mass adoption and pushback from the system. My work in this started in Seattle years ago, where I was working in research at a company called Pacific Northwest Research Institute, and it's a spin-off company from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. We were mostly working on the Human Genome Project at the time, but the rest of the building was taking normal cells, exposing it to carcinogens, and creating cancer in both cell cultures and in rats. And whenever they came up with a technical issue, all the scientists, we'd all meet together and look at what their issue is. So even though I wasn't directly working on cancer at the time, at least twice a week, I'm meeting with other scientists and looking at their data and looking at their technical problem. And so when I left there 5 years later, what was locked into my mind is viruses, mold, heavy metals, and chemicals cause cancer. Then I went to med school, became a doctor, and thought, this is really weird. We don't look. And Seattle was booming at the time. We had a lot of newly minted millionaires and a few billionaires, many of which became our clients in our clinic up there. We'd ask them, hey, can we take a sample of your tumor and your normal tissue and send it to a special lab and have it analyzed? And at the time, this was about $5,000 to do this. We would send it to Houston and we'd get these printouts that would show really high levels of plastics, petrochemicals, pesticides, rubber. And for that amount of money, we could only test a small number of things. But we became pretty convinced that part of what a tumor is doing is collecting the chemicals into one spot where it's damaging the DNA and causing abnormal growth. So then we applied for a grant at the NIH, National Institute of Health. They said no. We applied again. They said no again. We applied a third time. They said no again. And then we kind of realized that there's a lot of politics around this, that so many industries make carcinogenic chemicals that we know they cause cancer and it's in the literature, but that's kind of where it stops. It doesn't enter the doctor's office. It doesn't enter into the national policy here. When I moved to California, I continued this work. We have the highest rate of breast cancer in the county just south of me, Marin County. And we've been studying what's in the women here, but a lot of people have started hearing about it and are curious, why did my cancer come back? Why did I get cancer? I eat organic. I do everything right. And I think kind of the answer to that is collectively we all live this wonderful lifestyle that puts too many carcinogens into the environment. We kind of see two clusters of high concentrations of cancer in really, really poor people around manufacturing areas and really, really wealthy people like Marin County. And in some of them, when I take their toxicology sample, some of these wealthy women It looks just like they worked at a factory in China.
And yeah, so I mean, this is super fascinating. And I guess the pushback would usually be, oh, this is anecdotal. And, there's not enough sample size. I mentioned a book that I just read from an author called Alden Wicker, and she wrote about dyes and textiles.
Hmm.
And she did an extremely great job at just like always saying, look at those two things. Look at like the chemicals that we know in our consumer product, and we know that they have these effects on organisms, and we know that the safety levels are like this. You know,
Hmm.
do a test with a rat, and if you don't see anything, you consider it's okay. And then you just multiply the weight of the rat to a human, and then kind of like that's it. But you don't look at like how these cocktails interact with each other, and maybe one chemical might lower your skin barrier, and then the other one might enter your system. All of this doesn't amount to like overwhelming proof. And then one thing I also want to take ahead, I have a very good friend who's an environmental engineer, and he told me like the thing is the studies will always take 5, 10, 20 years, but the
Yeah.
development of the chemicals, it's already there. Like there's like alternative chemicals already developed. And the moment, like for example, PFAS became illegal, people just open a drawer, there's a new chemical, it's one molecule different than PFAS. Maybe it's not even considered a PFAS yet, it's not named, and functions the same way. And for the next 10, 20 years we will use that. And he also said,
Yeah.
uh, this
Or
thing is like,
the BPA free things, they're turning out to be as bad or worse.
yeah, the problem will always be, it's so easy to just say, oh, this is anecdotal. What's the proof? And it is unfortunately really difficult to make this as a definite proof.
Yeah, it's true. We often have to find very unique cases. I'll give you an example around PFAS. When we take a sample from somebody, we'll find PFAS and we'll find a slew of other chemicals. And the chemical companies will often say, well, you can't prove it was our chemical that caused the cancer. Here's all these other things.
Mm,
And and then every so often we get certain cases that defy that. I've got one right now. We have a cluster of Philadelphia based cases around PFAS, usually with glioblastomas, so very aggressive brain tumors that are pretty deadly in 12 months for most patients. Had a call from a patient there who found out about my work. We ran his sample, and he was somebody runs half marathons, super healthy, ate organic, but he did work down by the Phillies field and down by the Naval Yard in Philadelphia. And sure enough, the only thing that showed up abnormally high in him was PFAS. Everything else was low. Even stuff that we normally find, plastic and a few other things in these types of patients, and we didn't find anything except for very high levels of PFAS.
my mom also had glioblastoma, and she died
Okay.
at 63. So, and it was also interesting because it started with a benign tumor, a different,
Hmm.
uh, I think, oligodendroglioma, um, and that and that was true. That in the beginning it was interesting to see that people say, "Oh, it's a benign tumor, so that's not, we don't need to worry too much." And then it just quickly changed, and then it was too late. There's a part in me too where I'm like, I don't want to dig in this too deep, because who would you blame for? Not sure if this number is true, but I read recently that 70 to 80% of cancers are from lifestyle. So there is a genetic component to it, but
Hmm.
amount that we see cancers now is just much, much higher. And it may be that you have a genetic predisposition and then sort of environmental trigger.
Absolutely. I'll use an example: the BRCA genes, which are well studied. Barbara King at University of Washington discovered it, and this was 20 years ago, so we really understand these genes well. It really only conveys somewhere between 8 and 12% of risk. The other 90% is what you expose them to. You kind of have, if you have that gene 50-50, you'll get cancer. But even with that, half the people with the gene don't get cancer.
Mm.
So there's clearly a environmental trigger there. And that's what I think is disappointing. There's not a lot of, you can get research money from the cell level to the mouse level, and then when you start getting into, like, we want to look at this in humans, the money dries up. A lot of the studies are coming from Europe, is putting out a lot more studies on this, I think, because the government's paying the bill and there's a vested interest to keep things out. But I think even in Europe, there's a lot more that could be done.
Yeah, this, I don't know if you're aware of REACH. This is a European textile regulation, and it's better than nothing, but it's hard. It doesn't feel reason to celebrate. And there's even more in the works, and I've also heard people talking about it, that there's going to be a very much more favorable look at polyester, because it
Mhm.
uses less resources apparently, right? Because they just say, oh, you just take it, it's basically waste product from the petrol industry, so the CO2 footprint is less. And it's like, it's a really weird way of calculating, and it makes people feel like me, who, I have nothing against plastic, quite the opposite. It's an amazing material, but we should
Right.
use it very carefully and selectively, when there are no other alternatives. And then also, understand plastic comes together with a lot of other chemicals together. It always comes in a package. And I do think, I mean, this is kind of obviously what our company is trying to do. We can make a lot of consumer products with natural variants, where we understand exactly what they do when they grow, and how they will decompose eventually. And there's no like mystery trail of chemicals that we just say, yeah, whatever, leave this for the next generations to figure out. So I do think we should. I almost erring the caution. Like, if we're not really understanding how something works, how can we be so irresponsible to just pump it out into the world, and then just see what happens? And I mean, things like this too, like, falling sperm count, fertility.
Hmm.
And another thing that I read recently, I think it was in the New York Times, was the epidemic in the US of chronic pain. One third of people have chronic pain. We don't know why, which makes me think, like, how crazy it is that we spend so much money on expanding the lifespan when the quality is going down. My dad has a lot of chronic pain. I mean, it's literally destroying his joy of life. As a society, we behave extremely irresponsible with these chemicals that we're using. To me, it's in equal parts fascinating and frustrating.
Yeah, I think 50 years from now, they'll look at us in the same way that we look at the Romans and say, why did they build their aqueducts out of lead piping?
Yeah.
They all get lead, they were all lead poisoned, and we can, study the amount of lead in their bones. It'll be the same thing with us, but with plastic. Right now, we have about, I think it's around 220 women with breast cancer that have submitted a sample, and BPA is the top thing that we find, bisphenol A. And I think, part of it is that cohort grew up in the 80s and 90s where there was really heavy use of BPA. We still have heavy use of BPA here in the US, but I think a lot of people have gotten savvy to it and are now using stainless steel cups and glass containers to store their food. But it takes, if you're not directly provoking it out of the body, it can sit in the fat and slow release for really long times. And I have the same concerns over polyester and a lot of the synthetics. It is still petrochemicals and plastics. And I always tell my patients, we can test for the most common stuff, but there are thousands of chemicals. And when you manufacture something, thousands of
Mm.
byproduct chemicals, most of which we don't have the capacity to test for in a cheap way. And so, you may have low BPA in you, but a higher, different plastic compound that, we just don't have a commercially available test for.
Chris, this is spot on, and this is one of the big issues. There are very good certifications for textiles. GOTS and Oekotex are the biggest
Hmm.
one. The problem is that they test for a limited amount. I mean, Oekotest, they
Right.
directly test for a limited amount of chemicals. They can't even test for all chemicals. And now there's this lawsuit with avocado mattress. I don't know if you know that, but
Uh-oh.
avocado is,
We
they
just
went.
bought one thinking it's the cleanest.
Yeah, and they are probably the cleanest because they get every certification they have. But there's this law case in California. Somebody he tested for PFAS and found PFAS in the mattress. And avocado said that's not possible because we have Oekotex, and Oekotex said, oh, it's not possible. But the simple fact is, there are a lot of chemicals that are actually PFAS, but they're not in the category yet of PFAS
Yeah.
because they've not been named yet and they're not tested for and so on. And I think this is the problem with certifications, the complacency. Once you have the seal, people go like, "All right, good, we're good, we're safe. This problem is solved." At the moment, the approach we do with manufacturing is just, I mean, it's crazy irresponsible that we just use chemicals that we know are like similar to hormones, kind of interact with your body somehow, but it's not been studied. So let's push it out and let's wait 20 years
Yeah.
until, yeah.
One thing that we just started a pilot study on PFAS with our firefighters. We have some preliminary data. These are tagged as forever chemicals. You can never get them out. And so I poured through the literature and I was like, is there any data for that? And I was like, not really. They're talking about how it doesn't break down in the environment. We don't know much about the kinetics through the body. So we took a group of 10 firefighters and put them through our usual detox program and then remeasured their PFAS. And they all drastically dropped over a 16-week period. So we know that with our current protocol, it can come out. We don't know what about our protocol is clearing it. We don't know if it's the sauna or the glutathione or which aspect of it, but we know we can get it out of them. We also know how it's coming in. The firefighter turnouts are coated in PFAS to
Mm,
make them flame retardant. So we're now doing a secondary study where we're having them wear really thin wool between their coveralls and then remeasuring the PFAS to see if we get less in them by having that barrier. We have to use wool because we need something that's heat and flame retardant, which rules out polyester because it'll melt with the
mm.
heat for them. We're talking to Paul Stamets, the mushroom guru. He's always found mushroom species to break down all kinds of products. So they're doing a little study right now as well to see if oyster mushrooms and things like that can break down the PFAS. I think we'll probably find that nature always figures out a way. The question will be, what does it break down into?
Yeah, that is with a lot of chemicals too, is we don't even know what they break into. And sometimes the breakdown product might even be worse for the health, of the water bodies than the actual chemical,
Yeah,
which is,
that's absolutely true in the cancer world. That sometimes the chemical company is correct saying, our chemical doesn't cause cancer
yeah,
until
but
the
it's,
liver cleaves it into a different molecule and then it causes
but
cancer.
I mean, to me, this is just so insane that we allow all of, because like the thing too is this, there's literature from the 60s, 70s, 80s, this PFAS thing that you mentioned with flame retardancy that's been studied on children PJs in the 80s. And then they still today, polyester PJs are covered in flame retardant material, so they don't burn. But it's really I as a manufacturer think like, yeah, I mean, I understand the economics, right? You can make polyester PJs I can make them for $1, $2, and I sell them for 9, and it's a great deal.
Right.
But why is this? Why am I allowed to do this? Rate of
Mhm.
consumption is through the roof. People consume their own body weight in textiles every 2 years. Textiles now, they say an average time a textile is used before it's discarded is 7 times. It's very bad that this is also the time where it's the most toxic because it's still leaching a lot of chemicals that are in there. So what we right now do with like this like hyper capitalism, I'm afraid I sound like a communist in this call, but like but what we're really doing with this hyper consumption is we just like expose people to more. I mean, they have the ability now to consume more, so they're exposed to more of these chemicals. It's scary, but it's also fascinating, that we humans just, we're cool with this, that we just go like, yeah, we're busy, there's so many other things, instead of just making safety profiles for chemicals. And
Yeah, I think it's such a hard thing too, where part of the American dream, the good life, the ability to dress the way you want, drive the car that most expresses you, have the house that is you. There's a lot of how to express yourself is so much about the culture here. But I think so much, when I think about neurochemistry of the brain and what drives us, it's dopamine drives. We're in a very hyper dopamine state. I can shop 24/7. I can connect with my friends 24/7 and scratch that dopamine itch of whatever I want when I want. And now, and especially here in America, infinite amount of credit to keep that dopamine train going. But you can see that at some point this is going to come to a crash. To me, it all comes down to this like constant drive for newness. If you have a car that's more than 5 years old, it's odd. I
mm,
remember I got a new car, new to me, and was talking to a patient about it, and they saw me get into my car, and they said, "Dr. Holder, that's not a new car. That's a that's an old 2011 Jeep. And I said, yeah, the doctors that do what I do, we never buy new cars. We want it already off gassed. No, it's so true. You know, what you're saying about textiles, from everything from the clothes we wear, the fabrics that new cars are made out of, anything that's coated in any sort of stain, whatever, it's a PFAS. Most athletic and rain gear has some
Ironically, most
coating.
yoga and sportswear, like ironically, the people who are like, oh, it's all about
Thank
my
you for bringing that up. I have a whole practice full of skinny organic women with breast cancer,
yeah.
and I find components of yoga mats and clothing in them.
Are you concerned with dermal transportation and things that are on the textiles that they still enter your body? Like, what is your recommendation for washing textiles?
I definitely would wash them before you wear them, and sometimes twice, and then hang them somewhere in the garage or outside and let them off gas until you can't smell anything. Another big part of the exposure is not just the product itself, but the packaging, and then where the packaging ends up.
Well, I'm kind of like trying to focus on low hanging fruits, and that's actually also the reason why we started with bed sheets. That's where I spent a third of my life, and the bed, the mattress, the
Yeah.
pillowcase. What would you say are like low hanging fruits and things that people can do when it comes to avoiding toxins in?
Yeah. Well, along the lines of bedding, we spend a third of our lives sleeping, as you mentioned. I am an advocate of as organic bedding as you can. Same thing with bedrooms. I would say for our women with breast cancer, the number three thing that we find is a toxin called ochratoxin, and it's from black mold. And there's a lot of preliminary research when we expose rats to it, they get breast cancer, they get Parkinson's. So we know this is bad news, but we often find it in the bedroom, usually from condensation on the window dripping onto the drywall or behind furniture. So if we find that, so I'm really into like low hanging fruit is the health of the bedroom where you're spending so much time, and then after that, um, the health of the office space in terms of both chemicals and then also EMFs. Been looking at that for a long time, and
EMFs?
yeah, so the exposure to electromagnetic frequency
Yeah.
off computers, phones, screens. So we actually rent them in our practice and have people check their bedroom for abnormal levels of EMF. Like if a wall outlet isn't done correctly and it's you're laying next to it in bed, you could be exposing yourself to a fairly big field for a third of your life. So we check a lot of stuff like that. We already know laptops and cell phones near the genitals in men knock out sperm counts. But sometimes it's like showing somebody when I grab the meter and I show them, look at how much is coming off my computer right now. Then they can really see, like, oh, there's a 1.5 to a 2 foot radius of pretty high EMF there. And then there's short practical things you can do. You can put a little bit of Faraday fabric underneath your desk, and that'll block a lot of it. I've yet to find any cell phone thing that worked. I've had all patients come in with all kinds of gadgets and sleeves and this and that. I haven't found any of them to really work.
Are there studies? That's something I have no idea about. Like, are the studies of EMFs like they're pretty solid when it comes to?
No, what I said is really controversial.
Yeah.
So you'll have Swedish researchers saying this is a problem, and then American funded studies funded by the company saying it's not a problem.
The author that I mentioned before, she was supposed to be on a TV show, and it was the thing that on the way to the TV show, something must have happened, and they canceled her segment. And I mean, because
Uh-huh.
she was broadly speaking about the dyes and the chemicals used to make dyes, and basically that we all are constantly exposed to a high level of potentially dangerous chemicals. And a funny thing though is, and made me really happy. She uploaded her first video on TikTok and got 2 million views in like a couple of days, because it was a weird thing, and it makes you believe in conspiracy theories. Like why would that be
Yeah.
canceled? Just while
Or
she's
even
driving.
not a conspiracy, it's just market forces of if they're donors, who's funding the media and who's buying the advertisement segments don't want this out because it hurts the stock market.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always avoid the word conspiracy or conspiracy theory because one, if it's true, I don't think it's a conspiracy. It's just
Yeah.
inconvenient information. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. And I usually, for the most of it comes down to money for me rather than the government's trying to do this or that.
Yeah.
I
The,
think
the
people are trying
economic,
to maintain their business
yeah.
and their
Yeah.
profit share at any cost.
Yeah, I fully agree. I often also, I thought my beginning my work was sort of a, like consultancy work. And I often think, like when people say like, oh, why would company do that? It's like, there's like a 25-year-old, has a big Excel sheet. And then he just realizes, oh, if we can, decrease the cost of this product by 1 cent or 1%, and we're using a different chemical and there's no public study, like, I'll save your company $2 million. And they go like, very good. And that's why they earn so much money. There's no ill intent really, right? They do what they do. They work with big numbers, with big Excel sheets.
Hmm.
And um and it's literally just the forces of the economic system
Yeah.
working.
And that's what I really appreciate about your company is you guys are thinking about in all aspects of even like what happens to the wastewater,
Mm,
you know. Okay, if it's made in China, it doesn't affect me directly. But now we're starting to be able to trace things that like we can pick up the mercury in the US off a coal-fired power plant in China
yeah.
that's powering the plant that's making the clothing. Um, the world has gotten really small all of a
Yeah,
sudden.
yeah. And I think one of the things that I really hate about textile labels, there are a lot, is that you don't need to declare anything other than the name of the fiber. That often is also wrong. They can leave out anything that's less than 1%, and then even then, and still they consider 30% of the fiber content declaration is wrong. But the other thing is just the country it's supposedly made in, which clearly is only the last production step. Textiles are made to a large portion in pretty much India and China.
Yeah.
Maybe, and then everything when it says made in the US, when we started working during the pandemic with made in the US PPE supplies, I also said like, I'm all up for it, but where do you think the materials are made from? Of
Yeah.
course, now
It's
they find
laughable.
go here. We bought, literally buying these machines from China because they, now the best at making these machines. And then we just do the last production step here so we can slap a made in the USA on this. And that's also a reason, we do produce, I want to say proudly in China because we work with really, with people who
Mhm.
want to change the industry there. We also got a grant for, for making this special dyeing method, which was very easy. And as a German, I can say it's much harder to get it in Germany. It's much longer time to get grants like this.
Mhm.
And um, and I do think, of course, we can also do the final production step in Italy. It's very easy. I can set this up in like 4 weeks and it says made in Italy because the last button or whatever is sewn on Italy. I just think it's so silly. And but we've gotten kicked out. We were in a very big chain in Germany for luxury bedding, and that's the reason why we got kicked out because they're like, oh, can't make luxury textiles in China. It's not gonna fly. This borders on racism as well because if
Yeah.
if that is literally like but it's also the law, like at the end, this is what the label needs to say, just the final production step and the fiber content. It doesn't say anything about the extra chemicals, doesn't say anything about the dye. Easily a third of the weight of the product, no need to declare anything. This is something where I'm always like, just
Yeah.
ick.
Well,
Yeah.
and then there's the flip side to declaring everything too. In California, we have something called Proposition 65,
Yeah.
where everything
Yeah.
is declared, and everyone just kind of walks around saying, "Okay, everything causes cancer."
We have movement in food now, I would say. Probably 100 years ago, very old, like organic labels in Germany. That there's one, I don't know if you know that, called Demeter. They're 99 years old this year, and be 100
Yeah.
next year. They're high, they're very high standard on food. But I would say like in the 90s, this became just way more things about organic food. Then there's cosmetics, where a lot has happened in the last 10 years. But textile is just like, well, we're not part of this. And this is really fascinating to me. Like a lot of chemical companies that make chemicals, they sell in different industries. And when you go on a trade show, they often say, yeah, we make we make dyes for food and cosmetics, and like we have really great stuff, but the textile people, they don't want it because they say zero consumer demand for cleaner textiles. To me, textiles are fascinating because a lot of solutions, I would think, like I'd say like, hey, just like on foods, the company has to declare what chemicals are in there. And for these tens of millions of people with sensitive skin who don't want to have formaldehyde on their skin, why are they not able to just read on the label this has formaldehyde? All right, I'll pick something else. Wow, I've never thought about textile. I've never thought about what a textile color is made of. And the moment I say, oh, it's made from the same thing as plastic, I had this podcast with a woman. She's like, sorry, we need to stop because I feel really stupid. And she Googled it, and then she came back 5 minutes later and she's like, oh my God, I just had my mind blown. I've never thought about what color is made of. And like, what about all my organic clothes? Are they all made from like plastic color? I'm like, yeah, basically, yes. You might know the number, but like, how many women do we have to do IVFs now to get pregnant?
Oh, I don't know that number, but it's high now. Where
It's it's
I would
crazy.
say, like, out of my friend group, half of them had
Yeah.
kids naturally, and the other half had IVF.
Yeah, and I've noticed that everybody's open to talk about this. So I don't know how well my sample size is, but I would also say half of them.
Hmm.
And I also, there's another thing where I'm like, my alarm bells go off. Like, hey, we still need to, this is still how we're making babies. Like, if you and then the thing too, that's a crazy thing. That's different between US and Europe. You guys have to pay like $20,000 for like an IVF.
Hmm.
Is soon will be that you're too poor to have babies. You cannot afford it anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
talking about talk about bottleneck. That is, and it should literally be a human right to be able to have children. And as somebody who just had a child, it's the best thing ever. Like
Mm.
the last 30 days, I wake up every morning. I'm like, happiness, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I do think that putting chemicals into the world where we take this away from people for
Yeah.
profit.
How did the mold get into you? How did the plastic? How did the jet fuel get in there? Flame retardants, textile components, and then how do
Mm,
we get out of it? But we are at a point where it's not. One of my patients was like, this, the way you're doing this is inefficient because you're like with one patient at a time. You need to do a movie or do a book or something like that. To which I've said, all of what I'm saying is out there. There's
yeah,
movies, there's books.
yeah.
I think what we need a um, a cultural change, if you will, and that is where influencers can play a big role in bringing these ideas to light.
When my mom was undergoing this like chemotherapy,
Mm.
like these crazy black spots, and I thought like, oh, I think that's from like lying. That's like sores.
Hmm.
And then the oncologist said, no, no, it's pretty much everywhere where she's covered with the sheets. So she's like, just change everything to like either no color or less colored because sometimes the color just can be too aggressive. And that was like maybe 14 years ago, and just like I like literally I was like what is color even made of? Like I've never ever, I'm 30
Yeah.
years old, I've never thought about this, and I cannot imagine that a color and textiles would like constantly put your system under even a low amount of stress. Such a ubiquitous consumer product.
Or even the concept of microplastics with the polyesters and nylons, and as
Yeah.
you're washing them and they're breaking down to the UV light, you can't. You take a sample of ocean water, we find plastic all over in it. So then the fish are eating it, we're eating the fish, and we all have a ton of plastic. And then we're here at my level where you end up in my office because you have cancer, and then I tell you there's plastic in you.
Yeah, and people go like, how is this possible?
How
Yeah.
did this, and I'm like, we have plastic everything. And
But
again, I tell people every day, I use plastic. Plastic has made our lives amazing, but we got to figure out how to not get it in and on our bodies.
like a lot of the advancement we have when it comes to health, when it comes to preventing contamination, could only be done with plastic. Plastic is amazing. It's one of it's probably the most amazing material that we found. Way more amazing and useful for us than let's say gold or any other things that you can think of. the problem is really, and that's not my quote, but that's what a drunk artist told me in Japan, because I was like on this like, yeah, what about like wood and natural material? And I don't even know what is natural, because oil is also natural, happens in nature. And then he said, no, 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 you
Yeah.
asked the question wrong. He said you have to ask not about the material, you have to ask about the artist, the craftsman. He has to understand the material and then decide the purpose. So the problem is not the plastic, it's how we use the plastic and for what we use it. And in hospitals, and probably for an IV bag, it's the right material. But I would say in a lot of textiles, it's the wrong material. It doesn't perform well as a textile. It doesn't help your skin breathing. It further irritates your skin. It's, often it's less durable, or, has other,
Hmm.
durable in terms of easily rips and other things like this. So it's often not the right material to use in textiles, but it's just used because it's the cheaper material. And I think
Right.
that's where sort of the craftsmen, where the companies that make really have to make a decision: is that the right material?
And able to, shape it into unique shapes. They love the plastics because you can make really cool designs
Yeah, and the color.
quickly and cheaply, and color. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize how difficult it was to make color 100 years ago. It's part of the colony system that the UK has. Was a lot of us just making textile colors in Indonesia and other parts of the
Yeah.
world. You can make blue from this plant here, red, blah, like so. They had to maintain a global empire.
There's a really cool display I think you'd be really into. There's the Museum of the Native American next to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where they have a lot of old textiles from different tribes
Yeah,
across America, where you can see, like, you don't get the bright popping colors, but there are blues, there are a lot of yellows and reds, but they're all plant based. And that's part of, what I've been spending my time studying as well is indigenous medicine and indigenous philosophy. And
mm,
embedded in these cultures is some of the answers to this. I spend a lot of time on the Lakota reservation, and it's interesting because some of these tribes, part of their prophecies are that this way of being is going to also fall away, and them retaining some aspect of the old ways is going to be what allows a new thing to come. And I can kind of see that as a possibility now, of like, those were the last people here living without all the plastic and without all the new things. And I can see a real resurgence in that interest, and also in that medicine philosophy. I always talk to my patients about, in indigenous medicine, it's not you have cancer. Linguistically, you would say, we have cancer manifesting in this person. What are we all going to do collectively now that we understand what
this is
caused
so.
it? And I,
This
and I
is
think
so.
that's where we have to go.
This is so interesting. That's literally what we say. Like, we have a fertility problem. It's not person
Yeah.
A, B. Is well, that's one of the things too. The shame,
Yeah.
and that I see a lot of like men have with their sperm count. This like saying, your sperm count is not good. Instead of saying we do have a fertility problem, we
Hmm.
do have cancer, we do have a high rate of cancer. That's really good.
There's
But
so much trauma on the reservation from what's happened, and they're kind of a disappeared people. We don't see them. We don't acknowledge their medicine, and their medicine and their philosophy is inconvenient at
mm,
best. But also, I see embedded in it, why I spend so much time there, is I see embedded in it so many of the solutions of what we need.
yeah,
Um,
the fact that you said with the looking at a disease problem manifesting in one person, that is, um, I mean, if you talk to any public health expert, that's probably how they would like us to
yeah,
see
we
things.
we did this.
Yeah,
When they're like, "How did the plastic get in my breast?" I'm like, "It's not just you. We all did this.
yeah,
And we all need to have a better understanding of it so we can change." The cool thing is, though, I'm like you. I'm very positive about it. For every problem that's out there, there's already a ton of people working on the solutions, and we need to just move the market in that direction. There was
yeah,
a
yeah,
time when the majority of what I was seeing in patients was petrochemical fuel residue. And
yeah,
now we're seeing it dropping here, and dropping in major cities, because there's enough people driving electrical vehicles that I'm seeing less and less of that in people.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, this is one thing too that I can see in the textile industry. I just went to like the biggest trade show. It's massive, 150,000 people, and that people build up whole factories just for 5 days to show, oh, we've perfected this process. So, and and then I'm kind of also positive there. In some ways I said, oh, this bloody industry, and it's all just the same rubbish, and everybody writes it's sustainable, and
Hmm.
but it's clearly not sustainable. Like,
Greenwashing.
yeah, but then on the other hand, you often see like father and son, and you see a man with a turban and a Chinese man, and like they're shaking hands and they're working together, and then this gives me hope that like we can solve things. But I mean, clearly, it's just what people want, what the market want, what the wider
Hmm.
consumers want. Those people will build the machines that will make that. It wouldn't take much to change it. I would even say, and that's one of the things too, when people say, oh, these plant-based solutions and like these textiles made from plants, they're not affordable. I even think, you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. I don't think, for big companies, it would make a huge difference. Maybe initially you need to buy new machines and so on. An electric car is built fundamentally different than a petroleum car, and a
Yeah.
textile is made only using plants. You need different supply chains, different machines, but it's not like the cost isn't crazy different. And yeah, so I'm optimistic. I think we can definitely solve this, and this is why I also really appreciate your time, because I since we started this podcast, it's not really a podcast, but we'll just publish it on YouTube. But we started this 4 or 5 months ago, and I've been speaking with lots of people that just really well go like, wow, they're like really deep into this, but from a different angle. So I feel more and more this is not like
Yeah.
you're alone in your crazy rabbit hole.
Well, and I think too, maybe the way forward will end up being small people operating within their niche and fixing their one little problem. Because in a way, that's how we operate. We're a tiny clinic. We're three doctors and two staffers doing a large amount of work, for our size. And then same thing for you guys. I talk to a lot of people that I'm able to do some unique things in my clinic because I'm small and because we don't have all this bureaucracy. And I think, that might be the thing. The temptation for your business might be to grow beyond, but sometimes the better thing would be to stay small. And that's the power of small companies is we
Yeah.
can pivot quicker than very large companies.
I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, I do actually have to go here. I have a patient at 10.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, then I hope very much for a second round, because I still have lots of questions.
definitely. I'd love to.
Thank you.
All right. Bye,
I
Michael.
appreciate your time.
Thank you. And I love the conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you. It was really fascinating.